So what happens on these Sangha Nights is that over a period of a year, we look at a theme. And the theme we're looking at the moment over this year is the Buddha in time and space. And we're right in the middle of that theme. And what we're looking at the moment is particular teachings from what's called the Mahayana school of Buddhism. And the teachings that we're looking at are what are known as the 7-point mind training, or sometimes also the 8 verses of training the mind. And Vidania talked about these last week, so if you were lucky enough to be here last week, you'd have heard a full talk on them. But he particularly talked about these mind training tradition in terms of 8 worldly winds. So people who were here last week should hopefully remember the 8 worldly winds. And these are basically things that can blow us about. If we imagine we're like a little boat out on the sea, a little yacht out on the sea, these are the winds that can just blow us about off our course. So they are gain and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain, status and loss of status. And the one with the smiley are the ones that we want, and the ones with the kind of not so smiley, the sad face, are ones that we don't want. And in everyday life, we can very much see ourselves like moving towards gaining things, being praised, having pleasure and having status, and trying to get away from the other 4. But what these mind training slogans can help us to do is to actually steer the course we want to steer, to set our sails the way that we want to go, and to go where we want to go. They were developed in Tibet, and there's lots of different Tibetan traditions that use them as part of their training in Buddhism. They're the way that people learn and practice as Buddhists. And there's lots of different formulations of them. So in the one of them, there's about 59 slogans. So basically there are 7 points, and they're divided up into slogans. So there are 79 slogans, and what people do is they remember, learn off by heart one of those slogans, and take on to practice it. And they're very good, I think, for us in the West for a number of reasons. What they are about is they're about the path of training to become a bodhisattva. So that's a being who's working towards enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. Which means basically moving towards having a much bigger perspective. So bodhisattvas got a much bigger perspective. They're not just caught up in themselves, they're thinking about the world in a much bigger way and all the beings in that world. And these 7-point mind training, or the 8 verses of training the mind, are a way to do that. They're a very practical way to do that. So they're a way to change. We've got a very human attitude that we are the centre of the universe. Okay? So in this room at the moment, there are about 50 little universes, and we're all at the centre of each of one of those. And actually, that causes us a lot of suffering, because that's not the reality. The reality, of course, is that we're all part of the same universe. And if we act as if we're the only universe going on, as it were, we're just going to run into trouble all the time as we hit up against reality. And what we can do with these phrases is we can work from that very natural, it's a very human, very natural way of seeing the world, that we're at the centre of it. And we can start to break down some of those kind of strange ideas that we've got about the way the world works. And these slogans cover all aspects of life, really, from when you wake up in the morning to when you go to bed at night. And we can use them in all parts of our lives. So whether you're at work, with your family, on retreat, at the Buddhist Centre, whatever it is you do in your life, these precepts can be used. And what we're going to do is look at 3 of them today, the 3 short talks. If you want to read more about them, there is a website which is called the 7-Point Mind Training website, which is great because it has various different translations of them. Because they've come from Tibetan schools, they've been translated in different ways. And what someone's done is a huge amount of work, really, where I think it's a he, has taken these different slogans and compared the way that different authors have written about them. So you can actually look it up and look at different ways that people, and it's quite interesting to see that, to look at different ways that people have discussed each of the slogans. So they help us to practice in everyday life with the real difficulties that we face, including not knowing where your next bit of paper is. Yeah, and we're going to talk about 3 of them today. So first of all, Terry's going to come and talk about one which is about...
If you look on the sheet,
okay.
It's on that first verse there.
Okay, so she's talking about people we find difficult, which is a very useful thing to be talking about. Then Daniel's going to be talking about...
Dreams.
Dreams, okay. And then I'm finally going to talk about seeing the kindness of all beings. Okay, so Terry, do you want to come up? Okay.
So the mind trainings come in, as Satyajyoti said, in various formulations through a number of different teachers. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. But it's believed that they go back to a very great teacher called Nagarjuna, who lived around the year 150 Common Era. I studied them a few years ago when I was struggling with a very difficult time with my family. And although I didn't find them easy, they did help me to find a positive way through with the mess of after my dad died. And I still use them all the time. The verse I've chosen is from the 8 verses of Training the Mind by Geshe Langri Tongpa. I think that's how you say it. And he lived from 1054 to 1123. So this is verse 4 of the 8 verses. And it's, so it goes, when I see beings of unpleasant character, oppressed by strong negativity and suffering, may I hold them dear, for they are rare to find, as if I have discovered a jewel treasure! Exclamation mark. There are lots of different ways of saying that. Another one is when I see beings when I see ill-natured beings, overwhelmed with suffering and pain, wrong deeds and pain is another way of saying it, but you get the idea. I like this one because I'm very good at spotting other people's faults. It's like I know exactly what's wrong with you, exactly what they need to do, and if they did it, they'd be much happier. And most importantly, they would stop annoying me. And it helps me to remember that actually that they are a precious human being and that they are suffering like me. And I like it because it helps me when I'm on the receiving end of someone's unskillfulness. It can keep me, if I remember it, it can keep me connected with them instead of turning away from them. Do you do this thing where someone's being really annoying and unskillful and you just physically turn away? And it helps me to try and physically turn back and keep contact. It's like they don't deserve my kindness, but it kind of brings me back. And I like it because sometimes, of course, it's me being an unpleasant character, oppressed by strong negativity and suffering. And of course, it goes hand in hand that when I'm judgmental of others, it's because I'm judgmental of myself. And the verse emphasises the fact of interconnectedness, that we all struggle from time to time with strong negativity, and that it might be possible to connect rather than turn away. Am I being too rustly with the paper? Yeah. Okay. One of the strongest experiences I've ever had, I have to read it, sorry I'm not confident enough to just talk like some people are. I hope you don't mind if I am going to mostly read it. Which I think really showed how I constantly, on a very subtle level, sometimes not so subtle, made judgments on other people's behaviour. Happened a few years ago in a cafe I volunteered in that our movement runs every summer. There was another volunteer there who I found really difficult to be nice to. He was often late, forgot things, he never washed his hands, which is actually the worst thing. He was often grumpy and short-tempered, and my resentment grew and grew, and my righteous indignation grew and grew. You know, he was letting the team down, blah, blah, blah. So everything he did was annoying. And I couldn't understand how other people seemed to get on with him all right. Couldn't they see what a liability he was? For this particular day, I was due a break, and according to the rota, he was due to relieve me, and surprise, surprise, he didn't turn up. We were really busy, and I was desperate for a break, but I couldn't leave until he came. So eventually, about 10 minutes late, he turns up, like nothing was wrong, and I said, "Where have you been?" And he said, "What do you mean, where have I been?" And I said, "You're 10 minutes late, you're supposed to be here 10 minutes ago." And he said, "I wasn't, I'm on my lunch. I saw you were really busy and I thought I'd come and give you a hand." I got it completely wrong. I was completely wrong. And if I'd got that completely wrong, maybe I'd got him wrong. And I think of that verse now and I think, yes, what a treasure. You know, I think that I never was quite the same after that. I always remember it, and actually I'm still in touch with him. We get on really, really, really well. So, you know, we have this very deep belief, even if intellectually we know that nobody else can make us feel anything. We do have a very deep belief that other people cause our irritation. They do, don't they? You know? But from one minute to the next, this same person went from being the source of intense irritation to the cause of a very deep gratitude that he'd been the means of my seeing the truth about myself, painful as it was. And things changed. It was very, very positive. So one of the main purposes of practicing the mind training is to develop Kshanti. And Kshanti is the gap between our experience of being annoyed and all the other negative emotions, and our response to being annoyed and all the other negative emotions, hatred, ill will, all of them. Without the gap, there's a knee-jerk reaction. Kshanti is infused with patience, metta, love, persistence, gentle forbearance, turning towards, forgiveness, tolerance, receptivity, staying with your own discomfort in that gap with kindness. Kshanti is remaining in positive mental states no matter what is happening to you. And I'm going to come back to that actually about what a positive mental state is. Or isn't. With Kshanti, we're concerned with the snake at the centre of the wheel of life. You know, the snake that represents hatred. One of our order members, Ratnagosha, has written quite a bit on Kshanti. And he calls Kshanti the antidote to snake bite. It's the antidote to hatred and a lot of other poisonous mental states. There are times when I'm in the grip of that snake bite, when I'm tingling all over with it. My hormones are going mental at the moment, and I'm experiencing a lot of ill will. It's so painful. Everyone is my enemy. And how wonderful that Kshanti exists in our world. It's just a miracle that it exists. How wonderful that we're not at the mercy of those very difficult mental states. Sangha, the founder of the Triratna movement, our movement, said that Kshanti is the most beautiful word in the Buddhist canon. There's no enlightenment without Kshanti, and there's no Kshanti without unpleasant characters. Makes sense, doesn't it? That doesn't mean to say that we should actively seek out a difficult life. Not at all. And it certainly doesn't mean staying in an abusive situation, for example, when we should leave. Kshanti practitioners are not doormats. But living just an ordinary life here in our Sangha gives us enough material to work with. We have a lovely Sangha, don't get me wrong. Our Sheffield Sangha is the best Sangha. And in every one of us, from time to time, are beings of unpleasant character obsessed by strong negativity and suffering. And they are dear to us, precious as a jewel treasure, because they are the means for us to practice Kshanti. There's no enlightenment without Kshanti, and there's no Kshanti without unpleasant people. One of the teachers of the training, I don't know who it was, said that a beggar is not an obstacle to generosity. So in the same way, I'm able to practice patience with my enemy. He or she is worthy of veneration, just like the sacred Dharma, because he or she is the cause of patience, which I think is so beautiful. If we had an easy, straightforward life, never experiencing anything that rubbed us up the wrong way, we could practice all the positive precepts, and that will take us a very long way, and we would have a very nice life. But we wouldn't be able to practice Kshanti. So you can even see the logic of a slogan, looking upon our enemy as a spiritual friend, kind of makes sense. And I think it was Atisha, one of the mind training teachers, I think it might not have been. But it was anyway one of the important lamas who was going on a long trip, and he had to take a helper with him. And he chose, of all the people he could have chosen in the monastery, he chose the most annoying person in the monastery to take with him. Because he was aware that while he was away on this trip, he might not have the opportunity to practice Kshanti. So he deliberately did that. Amazing. Amazing. So this verse is about seeing unpleasant people, no matter how difficult they are, as the raw material for our practice. The path doesn't dodge around the hard stuff, but takes all our experience as an opportunity to wake up. Obviously we forget. I forget all the time. And we get lost in the difficulty, blaming other people for the difficulty. If only people weren't constantly moving around in the shrine room, I'd really be able to meditate well, is one of them. If people weren't coming and going all the time when I was trying to eat my dinner, I'd really be able to eat mindfully. Is another one of my stories. I'm not going to be nice to him because last time he was so rude and unfriendly to me. Blah, 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 blah. There's some of my little stories. But we need something that turns the stories on their head. And recently I had an experience of being on the receiving end of a really unpleasant customer, taking the not given, talking at me about her suffering for about 15 minutes. And I've always really struggled with this customer anyway, and on this occasion my hormones were raging, and I could just feel the irritation. Later when I confessed this, I sang, so I feel it in my fingers, I feel it in my toes, I could just feel the irritation, just tingling. I just wanted to strangle her. But that's what I wanted to do, but I just kept saying to myself, don't act, don't act, don't act. And I couldn't go so far as to say holding them dear. I couldn't hold them dear. I couldn't quite get that far. But I didn't act, and I didn't do anything other than just stand there, feeling the pain of it and staying in connection with her. So there's something about the truth of the training that kept me turned towards her. It's just being in touch with that truth. And she left and all was well, and I hadn't said anything unskillful. Intellectually I could say, oh yeah, precious, rare gem, etc., blah, blah, blah. But I was just glad I'd made it through that encounter without saying anything unskillful. But the amazing thing was, the next day when she came in, I got this massive, unexpected whoosh of love for her. And it was just completely out of the blue, and it wasn't something that I was thinking of. It was just like, wow, I'm really interested in you. And I wasn't at all the day before. So there's something about, there's some truth in the trainings. And I hardly recognised myself. It was just lovely just to be kind of in that love. It was just really, really nice. And I thought, there you go, it works. So coming back to Kshanti as being the practice of remaining in a positive mental state no matter what is happening, it's good to say that positive mental states aren't always pleasant. And you're not always happy when you're in them. So what was going on for me there was very unpleasant, but it was positive because I wasn't feeding my negativity. I was just allowing it to be there with the intention of not causing harm. So you might get this idea that a positive mental state is all happy, shining, open, but it's not always like that. For example, shame, remorse, humiliation can be very positive. Anyway, so when I see beings of unpleasant character oppressed by strong negativity and suffering, may I hold them dear, for they are rare to find, as if I have discovered a jewel treasure. And so this next one, okay, I will tell you, because it happened, but it's one of those things where, I was saying to Siri Mata before, it's quite difficult to talk about this kind of thing, where you feel like you've done something well. It's like, you know, like, blow my own trumpet, I've done something really well. But I will tell you, because I'll tell you the stuff that I do really badly as well, but this one was a good one. Because it wasn't, anyway, I'll tell you. So one day last week I was at the bus stop on my way home, and I was in a really good state. I wasn't tired, I'd had a really positive day at work, I wasn't hungry, I'd been surrounded by positivity all day, I'd meditated, I'd been to see my granddaughter, all was well in the world, I was feeling open and strong. And I say this because what happened next was very much contingent on that positive set of conditions that preceded it. On another day it might not have turned out the way it did. So there was this little boy of about 10 who I thought was on his own, and he finished off his drink, a plastic bottle, and dropped it on the floor. And the man behind me said, "Oh." So I said to him, I picked the bottle up and I said, "Hey, awesome, why don't you put that in your bag and take it home and put it in the bin? Because someone might fall over that." And the next thing is, and he said, "Oh yeah, sorry," and put the bottle in his bag. And the next thing, looming out of the darkness, came his dad. And he just then very quietly, with real menace, started to say what he would ever do to me if I ever talked to his son again. And it was just very threatening, and I had first of all a rush of fear. And then something happened that didn't seem to be coming from me. I would normally get very upset and try and think of something very clever to say, but I felt protected somehow. He was extremely unpleasant, and he was obviously completely oppressed by strong negativity and suffering. And somehow I felt genuine warmth towards him. Nothing he said stuck, and I was amazed. And as I looked at him, all I could see was his suffering. And the people on the bus were all on my side, and they were saying, "Don't listen to him, love, he's a nutter." Although it was kindly meant, what they were all saying, but it kind of fed my aversion to him, like, don't take any notice of him, he's, there's something wrong with him. And I said to them, well, he must have had a really good reason to react like that. How painful, how terrible for him to be in that state. And they looked at me like I was a weirdo and turned away. But it felt like a miracle. Ideally, I would have said the perfect thing, to help him be more skillful, to understand the damage he was doing to himself and to his son, that he was witness to all of that was terrible. And I don't think it was necessarily the best way to deal with it, but the training had kind of come together in those positive conditions, in a response of metta in the face of hatred. And I just thought, this training is just so fantastic. Shanti is just so fantastic, and it works. Thank you. It kind of wasn't personal. It was just I was looking at him. He was saying all that stuff. That was just stuff. And what came from me was just metta. It was a bit strange. So the training is, when I see beings of unpleasant character, oppressed by strong negativity and suffering, may I hold them dear, for they are rare to find, as if I had discovered a jewel treasure.
I want to just... Okay, so as Terry mentioned, there's quite a few different formulations of these mind training slogans, and the ones that I'm going to draw on tonight are attributed by a man called Atisha, who was a very well-renowned Bengali master of Buddhism, who's very important in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So he has this series of mind training slogans associated to him. There's 59 of them in total, grouped under 7 headings. And I think it's worth saying with these things that the idea isn't that we're working with all 59 at once. So we just sort of dive in, pluck one out that might seem particularly relevant to us, and then that just gives us a really workable ground to try and work with our minds. That's what they're really about. So the one that I've chosen to talk about tonight is one that I've been turning over in my own mind and working with recently, and that I find particularly helpful and evocative. So, my slogan, or rather Atisha's slogan that I've picked is, regard all Dharma as dreams. Although experiences may seem solid, they are passing memories. Okay, so I'm just going to look at it bit by bit, really, and just try and tease out some sort of understanding of what that's pointing towards, really. So firstly, that first part that I've unintentionally written down in black, the pen ran out, regard all Dharma as dreams. So I think the first thing we need to clear up here is we need to understand what that word Dharma is talking about in this context. So there's several meanings of this word Dharma, and the one that we would probably most of us be familiar with is the Dharma as the teachings of the Buddha, what the Buddha taught. But what's really being referred to here is Dharma as phenomena, as the events and experiences that make up reality, and more importantly, our experience of it. Okay, we might even go so far as to say what Dharma means here is the nature of reality itself. And the Buddha's teaching is very much connected with that, so that's part of the reason why they sort of share the same word. So what is being spoken about here is that, well, we should view our experience of reality, and perhaps even reality itself, as a dream. Okay, so this statement seems inherently metaphysical, to do with the nature of reality, and in a certain way it can be examined on this level. Okay, so by comparing our experience to dreams, this slogan is highlighting the importance of our minds when it comes to our experience. So just as dreams are the products of our mind, so too is our waking experience. Okay. So this statement on the centrality of mind is really, to me anyway, evocative of those really famous opening lines of the Dhammapada, which is a very well-known early Buddhist text. Experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Okay. So the mind mediates every aspect of our experience. Everything that we experience through our minds. And through the filters of what are called the kleshas, the mental poisons, greed, hatred, delusion. So, in this way, our experience is just as much a product of our minds as our dreams. Okay. So, it's important to say that this isn't saying that there is no such thing as an external reality. There's no such thing as a world existing independently of our own minds. But it's calling into question the extent to which we can experience that reality without it being modified by our minds in some way. And if we want to go a bit deeper into this, there are certain schools of Buddhist philosophy, particularly the Yogacara, which hold to the doctrine of citta matra, mind only. So this views mind and matter not as separate entities, but as sort of co-produced phenomena. So it really calls into question this division between mind in here and the world, the material world out there. So in a certain sense, we do dream our world as we experience it into existence. But to sort of avoid us falling down a metaphysical rabbit hole, I'm going to draw a line there. And I think one of the real beauties of Buddhism is that it's not particularly concerned with metaphysics or metaphysical questions. And actually, when we see the Buddha in the Pali Canon, he often really just is very reluctant to be drawn into discussions of that nature. Rather, Buddhism is at its heart pragmatic. And what I mean by that is it's not concerned with finding metaphysical absolutes, but with what works. Yeah, so what actually helps us towards achieving liberation from our suffering. So here the metaphysical question is, does reality exist independently, or is it, like a dream, just the product of our mind? Now, I'm not sure how helpful it is for us to reflect on that question too much. We're not really going to get to the bottom of that. I think the more useful question, the more pragmatic question, the more dharmic question is, how useful is viewing my experience as a dream? How useful is that in helping me to achieve liberation from some of the suffering that I experience? And that's the question that I really want to explore a bit more in the remainder of this talk. So when I was reflecting on this question, one of the things that came to my mind really strongly was a nursery rhyme, one of my favourite chanted nursery rhymes that goes, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Okay, so Why did that come to mind when I was thinking about this? So I was always really captivated by this nursery rhyme as a child, and I think it touches upon something really similar to our mind training slogan that I'm looking at now, because it draws a link between seeing the dream-like nature of our lives and with happiness, to floating merrily along on the stream of life. But why would this viewing of life as being like a dream, why would that help us to experience less suffering and more happiness? And to answer that, we need to look at the second part of our slogan. Although experiences may seem solid, they are passing memories. Okay. So firstly, although experiences may seem solid, and what this is drawing our attention to is our tendency to want to view the world around us as solid, as fixed, as definable, graspable, knowable. Okay, and we do this by projecting onto the world around us. Our mind projects these conceptual schemas, trying to impose some sort of order onto our external experience, to solidify it in some way. And for those of you who are familiar with the framework of the 5 skandhas, this is what is meant by Sangha. Okay. Now the problem with viewing the world in this way as solid is that it is not. So the Dharma teaches us that all phenomena are characterised by 3 marks, or lakshanas as they're called in Pali, I think, Sanskrit, one of those. So firstly, they are impermanent. Not just impermanent, they are always changing. Secondly, because of this, they are devoid of solidity or any sort of unchanging essence. And again, because of these 2 things, they are unsatisfactory. They're not going to provide us with any lasting satisfaction. So when we try to view the world around us and our experience as solid, we're bound to experience dissatisfaction and even full-blown suffering, because this is not how things are. So reality, just like in this nursery rhyme, is like a river. It's ever-changing, constantly flowing on, and impossible to grasp in our hands. And I think when we look really closely at it, our experience is the same. Okay. So as the slogan says, our experience is not solid. They're passing memories. So try as you might, you just cannot capture the present moment. You can't hold on to it. Rather than this, our experience is more like just this series of really indefinable mind moments, which as soon as you try to grasp them, just slip gently into the past. So trying to view our experience and reality as solid and unchanging is like trying to row upstream against the current. And to the extent that we do this, we experience dukkha, dissatisfaction and suffering. And really, I can't think of a better metaphor for this than a dream. So like a dream, reality is difficult to grasp, this sort of strange flow of mental impressions and feelings, which we try to sort of pull together and coalesce into this experience we can make some sense of. And also, I think we're all familiar with that experience, that really disconcerting experience when you wake up from a dream and you want to hold on to it. You want to make sense of it, to grasp onto it, but it just slips away from us into the depths of our mind. So I think perhaps if we experiment with seeing reality as a dream, we can learn just to let go of it a little bit, to forego this need that we have to hold on to it and try and define things, make things solid, and just try and take life a bit less seriously. And I think this sort of act of learning to live well in the midst of insolidity is a really, really fundamental part of practicing the Dharma, of living a life which is always changing and completely beyond our control in so many ways. And we really spend a lot, or I certainly do, spend a lot of my life taking things so seriously, just obsessing over the minutiae of our lives and our thoughts in this fruitless quest to control and fix things. And what we need, a teacher is telling us, is just to step back from these obsessions and to see through them, just like we see through a dream upon waking. And through doing this, hopefully we can rid ourselves of some of the suffering that is associated with these obsessions. So rather than expending all of this energy rowing against the stream, we just turn our boats around, let go of the need for always needing to be steering our course, and just merrily see where this dream of a life is going to take us. Okay, so before I finish, I'm just going to have a little footnote. And this is to do with the question of responsibility and karma. So often I think when faced with this idea that we should experiment with seeing reality as dreamlike, people can be tempted to draw the conclusion that, well, if we all live in a dream, however we mean that, we don't have to be responsible for our actions or the consequences of our actions, or to take responsibility for ourselves, because, well, actions in dreams aren't real. So this is emphatically not the case, and we need to be really clear about this. So to make progress in the spiritual life, we must view our actions and their consequences as very real, to take ethics really seriously. In a sense, this is really the only tool that we have at our disposal to make spiritual progress, or at least one of the most important ones. And just to illustrate this point, a couple of years ago I went to see Sangha Night, who's the founder of our Buddhist movement. And one of the things that was on my mind at the time is I'd been really troubled by my dreams. I had been having lots of dreams where I had been doing very unskillful things. I won't say any more than that. And one of the things that I wanted to know is I asked him, you know, Bhante, are these things that I'm doing in my dreams, do they have consequences? These actions in my dreams, do they have a consequence in the same way that actions in my waking life have a consequence? And his response was really interesting. So he said, even though not as strong as our waking deeds, actions in dreams are still, in some sense, a manifestation of our volitional minds. And in this sense, they're still subject to the law of karma. They still have a consequence, and can indeed have a very real consequence. So, take heed, even in your dreams, your actions can have consequences. Right, I'm going to leave things there, but I thought I'd just finish with another one of my favourite bits of Dharma. And this one is a very famous excerpt from the Diamond Sutra. So you should view this fleeting world, a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, and a dream. Thank you. One other thing I quickly wanted to mention, a little bit of a plug for something I'm doing at the weekend. I'm going to be running an evening of study looking at Atisha's mind training slogans for the younger Sangha, so people in their teens, 20s and 30s. We'll be starting study at 7:30, so if you want to come and explore this fantastic material a bit more, please do join me.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about, first of all I'm going to talk mostly about one of these mind training slogans, which is reflect on the kindness of all those around you. Reflect on the kindness of all those around you. Okay. And then I'm secondly going to talk very briefly about one it turns out I made up, which I thought came from this tradition, but I've been looking for it and I can't find it. Anyway. So let's start with one that definitely does come from the tradition, which is reflect on the kindness of all those around you. So this is about asking us to refocus our attention, to look at the kindness of others. And it's not about denying the bad things that go on in the world, or the fact that many people act in unkind ways. It's not asking us to do that at all. Because what it means in this, what Buddhism tends to mean here, is that it's not talking about the intentions of the people, okay? It's talking about whether it brings us benefit. And if another person brings us benefit, that person is said to have shown us kindness regardless of their motivation, okay? So if what somebody does brings me benefit, I see that person as having been kind to me, okay, whatever their intention was. And this one actually, I remember, I first came across it quite a long time ago now, when I used to go to Tibetan group actually, and so maybe even as long ago as I don't know, 20 years ago or something. And it was one of those ones that really turned things around for me. I was asked to go away and do things like think about the kindness of the bus driver. And I really remember being in Birmingham and getting on a bus and, you know, giving my 50p or whatever it was in those days, and get the ticket back, and I was thinking, but the bus driver's doing this for money. You know, he's paid to be here, he's not doing it for any kindness. But then I realised actually how much I was benefiting from not only the bus driver, but the bus and all the people who'd built the bus, designed the bus, the tyres, all that stuff, the road that it travelled on, the fact that someone had set up a system with subsidised at that time bus, bus service, that it ran pretty much on time, it got me to where I was going. There's just a whole load of conditions, and I realised how much I was benefiting from them, and it really turned around the way I saw the world. Because I think before that, I very much saw the world as what I could get out of it, what the world was going to give to me. And this allowed me to see what the world was already giving to me, which I wasn't even noticing, how I'm already at the kind of focus of all these different conditions coming together, which are giving me masses of things. And that really can change, it changed my mind, I think, a lot. And I think if you remember from the newcomers and the intermediate course, we talk quite a lot about how we determine or how we create the reality that we experience by what we choose to attend to. Okay, what we choose to attend to and how we attend to it. There's a lot going on in our experience, and we interpret it in different ways, and we choose which parts of it we dwell on. So if you get up in the morning and you turn on the news, and it tells you about all the awful things that are going on all over the world, and then you're in a bad mood, and you meet a few people, and you're horrible to them, so they're horrible back to you. Then you get to work, and you're really grumpy, and you moan a lot. Okay, you've created a world in which there's a lot of unkindness going on. But it's just one interpretation. You know, there could easily have been another day where, you know, if people who made the news changed their minds, they could have done a news programme which was full of all the amazingly good things that are going on in the world, you know. For every country that there's a famine in, there'll be lots of countries where they're actually feeding the people fine. For every country where there's a war, there'll be peace going on. You know, other countries where there's a lot of peace going on. We see a very small slice of the world when we look at the news or listen to the news. And if you go along to your bus stop and you're in a good mood and you chat to someone, well, you get a feeling of a day where other people are kind to you. If you go into work and you're able to be kind to your colleagues, they'll probably be kind back to you. So you're creating a world in which actually there is a lot of kindness going on. You're creating that. Okay. And I think there are two things, other ways we can live. One is that we could think about all the nice things that I do and how much everybody else owes me. Okay? And that's going to mean I'm just going to have a sense of entitlement then. I'm going to be doomed because people aren't going to live up to what I'm expecting. Or, as I said before, you can have the attitude I used to have, and certainly do have still a lot, which is that somehow I need to make sure what I can get from the world. What I need to be doing is looking all the time, what can the world give me? What can I get from it? And again, that's going to lead me to feeling pretty dissatisfied all the time because the world's just not going to meet my expectations. But if you turn it right round, you flip it right round, and you reflect on the kindness of all those around you, the world seems to become quite a different place. And of course, as I've said, you know, that experience of being on the bus and realising all those different conditions that have come together to create me to be on that bus in Birmingham that day, well, it's just, I can't get through a day without support from other sentient beings. The reality of it is we are completely interrelated, you know, from the clothes we wear, you know, everything in this room, they've all come from other beings. We're completely interdependent on it. And so actually doing this practice is starting to realise the nature of one of those lectures that Daniel talked about. It's about how we are interconnected with everything else. Okay, so the practice of meditating on the kindness of others becomes more specific when you divide it into two categories. So there's people you like and people you don't like. Okay? And people you like, well, it's very easy to be kind of grateful. Well, usually to be grateful for what they give. But it's interesting, isn't it, that for me, anyway, it's in some of my closest relationships that I start to feel a kind of very neurotic need that people should be doing things for me. It's their job because they're my partner or my mother or my friend or something. They should be behaving in certain ways. So even people that we like or love, we can often actually be feeling towards them this kind of lack, rather than perhaps turning it around and seeing what they already give to us, what their kindness that they're already giving to us. So meditating on the kindness of people we don't like. Well, I think Terry talked really well about that, about how actually often people we don't like are the very people who teach us the most. And situations we don't like are often the ones in which we grow the most. And I think it's really hard when you're in a very difficult situation or when you're with a very difficult person to think that. It's not the first thing you'll think about. But I do think that if you can turn it around, certainly retrospectively, I think I can look back on my life and see that some of the most difficult situations have been the ones where I've grown the most. And actually, some of those people who've been really difficult to me in the long run have given me the greatest kindness because I've changed the most. There's a couple of stories sort of from the Buddhist tradition about that. One is the story of Milarepa, that some people might know. So he was a Tibetan, and when Milarepa was young, he ended up learning witchcraft and killing about 25 people, something like that. And the reason he did that is because his uncle had stolen the property that belonged to his mother and to him. And later in life he regretted of what he'd done, and a great teacher called Marpa gave him lots of teaching so that he could kind of overcome the conditions he'd created for himself by murdering lots of people and progress. And in his lifetime he became enlightened. So who's the best teacher for him? Well, you'd think it'd be Marpa, who gave him all these wonderful teachings that helped him to grow. But actually what he said is that it was his uncle, his evil uncle, who stole the property from him and his mother. That was the person who was the most kind to him in his life. Because if it wasn't for that evil uncle, and it wasn't for what he then did, he wouldn't have had the motivation that he had to practice and to become enlightened. That's quite interesting. Another one is the Dalai Lama, and this one actually I find quite hard, but the Dalai Lama apparently has said that obviously the motivation of the Chinese people in invading Tibet and destroying Tibetan culture is not one of kindness, but for the Dalai Lama himself, the invasion of Tibet by China was one of the kindest things that happened to him. Because otherwise he'd have carried on being a very sort of secluded Dalai Lama in a very hidebound society where what he could do was very restricted. But because of the invasion of China, he had to leave China, and he's talked about Buddhism, kindness all around the world. And actually the teachings have reached a lot more people than they would have if he'd stayed up in this kind of mountain plateau in Tibet. I mean, I do find that quite strong, and part of me's kind of going, ooh, I don't know, because there are all those other people who've suffered so much. But I suppose for the Dalai Lama to say that, he had a reason to say that. Okay, so I think also this thing about seeing the kindness that all beings do to us is about moving away from having a kind of very instrumental kind of way of looking at life. What can I get out of life? What can it give to me? Towards much more having an aesthetic appreciation. And that is my personal experience, that when I remember to do this practice, I start to enjoy life a lot more. Because somehow I step back from my own kind of things I'm so worried about, and I just enjoy all these people who are creating kindness for me. Okay, so then I'll briefly talk about the other one, which turns out I made up. I don't think I did make it up, but anyway, I can't find it. So it's about giving away being right.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, it is one. Give victory to them. Well, yeah, okay. Maybe it's in it's the 8 verses, not in the 7. Okay, thank you. Okay. So give victory to others, yeah, give away. Well, I even looked on Google though, I wrote in, give victory away, it didn't come up with anything.
Yeah, the victories are there.
Okay. Okay, so giving up being right, that's how I interpret that. So being right is ever so important to me. I'm not quite sure why, but perhaps since I've been thinking about it these last few hours, I think I've noticed at least 3 discussions I've had with people, about 2 of them in this room, where for some reason I had to be right. And there's some, when I remember to do this one, again, it gives me such joy. I mean, I don't mean, you know, like if there's something that's really important, you know, like if I was having a discussion with someone and they were kind of going, well, ethics doesn't matter, I would think that it's important that I've got my case across why ethics is important. It's all those kind of little things that happen in life. You know, we have a discussion with someone and my experience is slightly different from them or something like that. Or particularly in some work situations with people who I feel they're being competitive with me. Well, I'm competing with them. Anyway, we're competing with each other. And I've had a few experiences where I've really been able to give away so that they're the one that's right. So if someone starts telling me kind of all this wonderful stuff about themselves and what they do, I sort of feel like my natural thing to do is to then try and come back with how wonderful I am as well. But instead, if I just kind of go, okay, you're wonderful. It just takes the ease away from me. It's like I can feel my shoulders drop a bit. It's just like a lovely way of being with people. And it's wonderful for me because I think that bit where I'm starting to wanting to compete with somebody, well, basically that's I can feel a whole sense of identity around that. It's something I'm very attached to. It's what you might call your ego. It's something like that that's kind of coming into being, even as I'm in that process. By letting it go, I can just feel it fade away, and it's very pleasurable, actually. So, giving away being right. I recommend that.